Let him just go.
The process will be that the Sarah, Alistair, Ed and Claire will all talk or whatever, and we'll just talk through. Then the amendments as noted will be brought up fairly quickly because they're not going in as an amendment to the recommendations. They're just going to go in there, because I believe there's fairly reasonable acceptance of them. So, who is going to lead off? Alistair?
Thank you.
Welcome, all of you.
Look, maybe if I start with a couple of matters of housekeeping. For those of you that haven't met the full team, we've got Claire, Ed, Sarah and Sarah here who will be each discussing the individual CCOs. I'll just lead off with a few introductory comments and a few health and safety matters, mainly that I've tweaked my back. So if I get up and start walking, it's probably not because I'm bored with the conversation. It's probably just I need to get up and stretch occasionally. Just a reminder of where we're at in the process. Last year, you as a council adopted the Auckland Plan 2050. Also, the 10-year budget, the LTP, was adopted, and the direction for this year's annual plan was set. These decisions set the priorities for the council group. Those priorities are being communicated to the CCOs through the letters of expectation. Now, the draft statements of intent that are before you today are the CCOs' response to the directions that you have set through the Auckland Plan, the LTP and the letters of expectation. And that is where we've focused our reports. The purpose of today is to provide comment on how well the statements of intent have reflected those priorities that you've set through those other mechanisms. I would advise that it's not appropriate at this stage to ask the CCOs to be doing things through shareholder feedback that have not already been agreed or funded. Simply, this isn't the day to be sort of setting new policy direction, as we're not able to provide full advice on the implications of any new direction. This is about giving comment on how well existing agreed direction has been reflected in the statements of intent. If past years are anything to go by, the conversation today will probably identify some operational or performance issues that aren't directly related to the statements of intent. We will do our best, if the conversation goes here, to take note of those and address those in the appropriate forum, whether it's quarterly reports or directly with the CCOs. But we'll just try to keep the discussion today focused on a strategic level of the statement of intent. Look, just some general comments overall about the SOIs. Generally, they reflect well the direction that has been set. However, there are always areas for improvement. In the report, from paragraph 12, we've just outlined some general comments that we think should go back to each of the CCOs. I think perhaps if I highlight paragraph 14 and 15 in particular, I think how council works together to coordinate its approach to both unlocking development land and also how the council group contributes to the processing of resource consents. It's a bit of a pain point with the community, but CCOs such as Auckland Transport and Watercare have a role in inputting into resource consent processes. I'd just like to reinforce that role through the statement of intent and ensure that they're doing that within agreed timeframes. And there's the usual general comments around ensuring that the final statements of intent reflect any decisions that are made in the annual plan and that the financial information is consistent there. So perhaps I won't labour the general comments about each of the CCOs anymore, and I'll just hand over to the team to go through each of the CCOs individually. With your indulgence, Chair, perhaps if we take questions, discussions around each CCO at a time. I think in past years, one of the challenges we've had as a team is knowing whether the comments that are coming from the floor reflect the will of the committee or just individual views of councillors. So I don't suggest we do everything by individual resolution, but we would greatly appreciate if we could just get a general sense of if comments are supported by the committee as we go through. So perhaps I'll leave it off there and hand over to Sarah to discuss ATEED.
So, councillors, just paragraph number 11 is really what Alistair was relating to. So let's not get into operational stuff. That can be offline with after the meeting, and that will be pursued. But we're not here to deal with performance. We are here to deal with the resolution shows. Sarah, thank you.
Kia ora koutou, councillors. Yeah, in respect of ATEED's SOI, the SOI does read in a large part similar to last year, which we consider is appropriate because it reflects ATEED's continuing focus on consolidating their work program in accordance with their strategy, focusing on a smaller number of more impactful interventions and a stronger spatial focus working in partnership with Panuku. So it reflects a continuation of that approach. By and large, they've responded well to the letter of expectation priorities, and our feedback is not material in the sense of we think there's fundamental issues with the approach, but suggest there's just some areas which would benefit from further refinement, and in particular, they're detailed in the report, but relating to the performance measures, just in terms of the clarification on some of those definitions and making sure that the benchmark data is established for the final SOI. We've suggested one area perhaps where the target could be a little bit more ambitious, and also just some clarity on how they'll be able to segment some of their performance measures either by customer or by spatially by sector. So I understand some work is underway on the methodology work sitting in behind this, so we just think it's important to emphasise for the purposes of the final SOI. We've also suggested a couple of areas where more detail around either timing or progress to ensure momentum with some items continue, and have also suggested that they provide, was present in last year's SOI, or sorry, I should say their current SOI, a table which shows how they align their expenditure for the accommodation provider targeted rate. We think that's quite a good transparent mechanism to continue, so suggest that should also be included in the final SOI. So that's it in summary, and I'm happy to take questions.
Right, ATEED. Member Tapu.
Well, because I've asked for early departure, I'd just like to do a little general talk over, which is applicable to all.
Okay.
Thanks.
All good.
So just want to just reinforce the recommendations that CCOs can and should show clearer commitments to Māori responsiveness in their SOIs, and just want to acknowledge the good level of content to Māori outcomes in the draft SOIs for Mangere Mountain Education Trust, Contemporary Art Foundation, or Community Education Trust comment. And just the board has raised the initial feedback on the drafts, but we're concerned there's no specific Māori outcome performance for Auckland Transport SOI, which had a previous KPI of mana whenua satisfaction. So just not sure what's happened there. And the last one is just about if there could be a note in the shareholder comments around Te Hongana. I know it's not going to be due till June, but we'd like to see that it's seen as a Māori outcome in the performance measures and targets in their final SOIs. So that's applicable to all, really, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Not really a question.
Right, ATEED, we seem to be happy with ATEED. Yep, we're doing ATEED, but I didn't have you up there, Councillor Casey.
I've got a comment that will probably go across all CCOs, but I'll raise it now with ATEED, and that is the public good component of the work that ATEED does, and that is and how that's reflected in the SOI. There's some really fine statements in here, but it's how we measure that bothers me a wee bit. So I'd quite like to hear from Alistair And by public good, I mean, how is ATEED responding to a growing diverse population? How is it relating better to councillors and to local boards in practice? And how is that measured?
Sure, sorry.
I'll give you an example for
Sure.
ATEED, and that is, well, can we just talk about the Santa Parade? How is ATEED growing regional events into large events, local events, sorry, into regional events? How is ATEED taking the events that we run and growing them into something better? And there's no mention in there about how they do that. So how do we get into the bigger pot? That's one example of what I mean by public good.
Sure. In respect of some of the public good aspects of events, I do note in the SOI where they talk about the alignment to the Auckland Plan outcomes, particularly belonging and participation, they do highlight in their SOI the important role that events play in terms of that sense of belonging, etc. Their SOI is silent on growing local events into regional events. I don't think ATEED consider that as their role. That's not currently a focus of their activity. Their event section of their SOI focuses primarily on those larger events that they have responsibility for delivering, and then obviously the major components. So that's probably a gap at present, and that I think would need to be perhaps a policy choice if that was a space that we as a council wanted ATEED to move into, because presently they don't do that. In terms of how they're relating better to councillors and local boards, well, certainly I know in the local board space they are taking the lead on a number of initiatives out of the Local Discretionary Initiatives Fund that they are helping to progress with local boards that sort of fall under that ED banner, and they have their local board engagement plan which they work through. They also have a number of relationships through their in partnership with the other half of our team, which deals with the Bids and Business Association. So I feel a good theme of their SOI this year was how they would be working with bids and business associations to leverage that kind of local economic regeneration space. So, yeah, those would be my comments in respect of that.
So just on that gap, I think it is a gap. I think that we've given them the big events to do, and there's no sense about who's growing smaller events into that bigger pot. So maybe I don't know where that goes, but that's a concern of mine. And it kind of Santa brought it all about, really. Like Santa's an event that encourages belonging, but it didn't seem at the time to belong in ATEED stable, and they've given it back to council.
My memory is that at the time of the accommodation targeted rate coming in, that is about the same time that they made the decision to move away from Holi, Diwali and other events that were considered non-tourist related. Is that correct?
There are a number of larger events such as Pacifica and Diwali from memory, which council has asked ATEED to deliver due to the scale of the event, but not the benefits that they derive. Normally, ATEED would look for events that basically deliver just trying to think of the acronym, regional return on investment, and they have certain thresholds for that, and those types of events don't deliver that. However, because ATEED has the expertise to deliver those sorts of major events, council has specifically asked to deliver them on their behalf. We're getting to a level of detail I'm not quite familiar with. Councillor Casey, can I suggest that our team will we'll have a conversation with ATEED and our the council events team to see if anyone feels that there is a responsibility to grow those events, and if so, who. We can't advise properly on that at the moment.
I think you do need to look into the fact that the industry itself, the accommodation industry, said this does not deliver any hotel rooms. This is a local event, and therefore it shouldn't be related to ATEED and the accommodation targeted rate. Councillor Cooper.
It's actually that I want to respond to. Well, that might be half of what AT does. The other half is ratepayers' money that isn't tagged to bed nights.
Well,
and that's where things like the International Cultural Festival held in Mount Roscoe for the last 20 years should now become a major event for Auckland. So how does the International Cultural Festival in Mount Roscoe get into AT's bigger bag? That's my question.
Yep,
and I think it's valid to say that just belonging and being proud of Auckland and coming out to something is good enough for me. I don't need to have a bed night beside it.
Did I hear a commitment from you that you would be investigating that and coming back to us?
I suspect there's evidence on YouTube that I did say that, so we're better.
Okay. Councillor Cooper.
My question is about para 25, the accommodation provided targeted rate. So just in terms of targeted rates, they need to be shown as show what the benefit is to the payer. Is that right? The people that pay it? In the law?
Broadly speaking, yes. So they need to be spent for the purpose for which they were collected, and this was collected for the purposes of delivering major events and generating bed nights.
Okay, so just I suppose my question is, do you know why AT would have taken that table out from the SOI from last year that showed the benefits or the activities? I mean, I know you're asking to have it back in, but is there any rationale behind why they would have removed that? Popular.
I'm unclear what rationale there would be. I don't think, not speaking for AT, but I don't think there's a reticence to put that back in. I think just from the point of transparency, officers, we think that's a good thing to go in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Andrew, do you want to take a seat and contribute in any way? There's a seat next to Sarah if you want to.
When the council sets a targeted rate, it has to consider who the beneficiaries of the activities will be, or that are going to be funded, who's imposing costs, and a range of other factors. Once the rate's been set, the council may only spend the rate on the activities that the funding impact statement provides will be funded by the rate, and we keep some separate accounts to ensure that we're tracking that. The accounting team does that. We don't necessarily have to do a list and a range of benefits each year. That's not a specific requirement.
No, I think, Mr. Chair, the reason I asked that, I think that the people that pay it would like to see what the activities are so that they can actually see that in the SOI.
Councillor Holtz.
Just following on from Councillor Casey's question, which I thought was a good one, but it does point up our need to be a bit clear in our direction. So are we asking our staff to talk to AT about what we would need to include in the SOI to pick up the growing smaller events into bigger events? Or are we directing the staff to say AT will do that, and then they will need to come back to us and say this will be the impact on the budget and this is the performance measurement you'd need to put in there? Because at the moment that's not there at all. So for us to put in a new thing, I'm just trying to get really clear in the spirit of what was asked of us by the staff at the beginning, just what we're asking our staff to do. Maybe should I just check what I think the staff are going to do and see if that appears to fit?
What I'm proposing we do is that we go and have a discussion with AT and the council events team to see if anybody currently has responsibility for growing the event, smaller events into regional events, and then depending on the answers of those, some advice would have to come back. If that's what you want as a council, somebody to be actively growing those, there will be financial implications and clear direction given as to is that the responsibility of our own events team or of AT, and we'll come back and make that decision. Because we don't have the financial implications of that decision and clarity at the moment as to who has responsibility for that, we would advise against including anything specifically in your shareholder feedback at this stage, but we undertake to come back to you with some advice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's really, really clear, because this is where we get into a bit of a schmozzle with these if we're not clear. I've no other questions. I just want to acknowledge what I think is possibly the best piece of work AT have done to date with the clarity of their SOI.
Councillor Newman.
Yeah, I agree with her. So what I find myself a little unclear as to what we would actually be expecting of a TEED beyond what they are doing here. We've just signed off on the destination strategy. Seems to me that's very clear, and the SOI appears to be reflecting very clearly that they will do it. So if we have a problem because there's a gap with events beyond that, why would we be talking to a TEED? Because surely if the focus is on the destination strategy that we have agreed, if there is something that is over and above that we're missing, which is not reflective of the principles of the destination strategy, isn't that something we need to be doing as an internal conversation as opposed to acting as shareholders going back to a TEED to say, oh look, sorry, we've got the destination strategy, but can you pick up X, Y and Z as well?
Look, I from my perspective, I'm agreeing with everybody. We do need to have that discussion with AT just to be clear about what they see their responsibilities as being. And if there is a gap that you as a committee want filled, then we just need to find who is best placed to do that. And it may well be our internal events team. I think we've got to include AT in that discussion simply from the point of getting all perspectives on it. But yes, you're right, Councillor, we have just agreed to a destination strategy and agreed what we are expecting AT to do through that.
Just to be clear, we know what their responsibility is. It's a destination strategy. If there's a gap over and above that, it's not a TEED that we should be talking to. It's ourselves.
Yeah, it could well be that the report's coming back to Environment Community on that, but we have Councillor Casey who's asking, you know, that maybe it should be considered. Is it something that's fallen between the gaps? We don't know, possibly not. It certainly wouldn't be covered by the accommodation targeted rate, that's for sure. So therefore it would have to be, if it was to be AT, it would have to be extra expenditure approved for AT to carry out that function, or whether it's going through Auckland Council itself. All right, I think Councillor Hills, we're almost down to it on AT, yep.
No, I just wanted to further echo Councillor Hulse and Councillor Newman, just because we did not ask them that in December, and it was technically nice of them to give us the Santa Parade money. They gave us a year's warning on that, but we had basically told them to not to change their focus on the events. So we need to maybe talk to our events team first, because it's really not in the letter we asked them in December. We've asked them to skinny down and narrow the focus 2 years ago. And so I'm just worried that we're sending mixed messages. I totally back what Councillor Casey's saying. We need a mechanism to do that. Is AT the right place? Or is maybe RFA Auckland Live the right place? Or is our council events team the right place? But we've kind of told AT not to be going in that direction unless it's jobs and visitor nights. It's very clear in our letter and their SOI that it's jobs and visitor nights.
Yeah. Right, Meg off just to finish the AT.
I presume this is comments as well as questions. Yep. Yeah, look, it was pretty clear what we wanted AT to do. Out of the money that the industry itself rightly pays, because previously the ratepayer was paying for AT to market so that the industry benefits. The industry now has to put money in, and they get that back off the visitors. So it was very popular with our constituents and not very popular with the providers. But remember, 2/3 of Auckland has said yes, they should be paying. out of that section of money that they get from the industry, they have to demonstrate that they are creating bed nights, and that's quite appropriate. But we also said that there were certain, and this is to Councillor Casey's point, there were certain public good events that don't bring outsiders into the city, and the Centre Parade was a clear example of that. And they said, well, we'll pull out of that. And we said, we want to keep supporting the Centre Parade. It's a great event. 90,000 people turn up with their kids to watch it. And what they have properly done is passed across the money as well as the responsibility to council. Now, ATEED wasn't organising the Centre Parade. There's a trust that organises it. They were simply putting the money in. So they gave the responsibility back to us to fund, but they passed the money back as well. So I think Councillor Casey and I got a good outcome out of that particular area. But I just think that needs some clarification around it. We still expect that not everything they do, because they're still half tax ratepayer funded, we still expect that they'll put money into some public good functions and not simply on the basis of bed nights in the city.
Okay, right, we're moving on from ATEED. I believe we've got agreement. I just wonder, given that Auckland Transport is possibly the more contentious one, that we just leave Auckland Transport till later and move to RFA, because I'm thinking we'll break for lunch at 1, but if we could get some of the others through, it would be good. So, yep, well, Panuku's fine. Yep, sorry, yep, Panuku, sorry, I just missed that. Yep, Panuku's good.
Thank you, through the Chair. So Panuku has addressed the expectations sought from the letter of expectation. Just to remind you, they were focusing more on delivering the Transform and Unlock program and focusing on improving the delivery of capital expenditure. They've covered both those aspects on page 13. We also asked them to prepare for the America's Cup and APEC and to work more closely with Council on the Marina strategy. Their response is detailed on page 14. Where we have asked them for some areas, or where we've identified areas for improvement, initially in the document, there's an opportunity, I think, to simplify their strategic frameworks. These have built up over the years and they could be made a bit more simple. We've also identified that I think there's the opportunity to provide greater visibility of their Plan, Transfer and Unlock initiative, as this is a key performance measure for them. And currently it's at a very high level noted in the document. I think there are opportunities for them to present that in other ways, but it's an area that we would like some more visibility over. Also, there's an opportunity for them more to note the work that they're doing with the Crown and the Council Group on the urban growth agenda and the possible development of the Urban Development Authority. That's a key area of activity that we expect will happen over the next year, and we would expect the SOI to note that. Also, there's a focus, we think that there should be a bit more emphasis on supporting local boards with the service property optimisation approach. Panuku could provide more advice and assistance in this area. There's more detail perhaps that could be mentioned around the Māori initiatives as well, particularly in regard to the America's Cup and APEC. They're significant effects, and we'd expect to see some presentation or regard to the Māori component there. And finally, we have said that there is a potential for them to consider a measure around climate change. We do note that Council is still in the development of its own climate change action plan, but we also note that they have their own internal measures around this and that they could be giving some consideration to making them a performance measure that's in their statement of intent.
Okay.
Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Claire, could you just tell us who was involved and what level the Council Family Integrated Infrastructure Planning Platform? I mean, from each of the CCOs, who attends?
So our understanding is that that's a new initiative that's being kicked off at the moment, and they're in the business case sort of development stage, and it's very important that they get the input from CCOs on that process. So that comes out of the Innovate Auckland team, and so we've reflected that in. It is a new initiative and it is something that is new and in addition to the letter of expectation, but it does carry on the theme about engagement with Auckland Council.
So it's only top level managers that are put onto that?
Our understanding is that it's a newly formed group and that they're just still in the business case stage of identifying that this is a piece of work. Once it gets past that business case, then it'll become more established and have a kind of governance framework around it.
Okay. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. So probably this is a big one, and it needs to apply to them all. And you've mentioned that each of the CCOs is responding sort of in its own way to addressing its climate response. So I'm just wondering, Chair, if there needs to be a motion there that just sends the message to all the CCOs to, once the Councillor Hulse's climate action plan is confirmed, which I don't think is too far away, then the CCOs put in place a strategy, a plan and measures to respond to that plan, to the climate action plan. Would that just, because we want it to just go to everybody. I mean, this is a high level direction that we're giving from council.
Through the chair, I would suggest that at the time that we have developed that strategy, that we would send out a notice to all the CCOs telling them there is the strategy, now is the time to adhere to that and reflect that and do that work. It is a little bit difficult at this stage when we don't have that to direct them to it.
Yeah, look, so this is SOI time. So we know that there's a body of work that's coming. It's pending. So my proposal would be to send the signal now, subject to its approval. We know, Councillor Hulse, it's only a month away, isn't it? Yeah, the draft is. So, I mean, this is a big issue. So I would prefer that we had a motion that sends a signal to respond to it once it's confirmed. At least it gives them a heads up rather than having a conversation a month or two down the track.
Alistair.
Look, we can send that signal, and I guess concerns around environmental impact were signalled in the letter of expectation. An alternative open to you is that under the Auckland Council legislation, you have the ability to direct CCOs to give effect to plans and policies that you direct, that you develop. So I think where Claire was going with her suggestion is, yes, we can send a general a comment in the shareholder feedback. I'm not entirely sure how that would be responded to in the statement of intent, but we could sort of have a discussion around that. But I think the most effective way of giving effect to the action plan when it is developed and agreed and adopted by council is you then have the power under the legislation to write to each of the CCOs and say, and give effect to this bit of it, and that becomes a legal requirement on them to deliver the portions of it that apply to them.
Councillor Walker.
I just want to speak further to Councillor Darby's comment. My understanding is that the CCOs have had the capacity to feed into the Climate Change Action Plan. They certainly engaged in the earlier low carbon strategy that I led in an earlier term of council. And my particular concern is that as we speak, these council-controlled organisations are embarking on capital plans that lock us in to significant increases in emissions. I could detail a number of those, and there is urgency around this. Each one of these CCOs should have its own climate change action plan and its own specific targets for reducing emissions across capital as well as operation. And they should have been doing this already. And I have a real concern that we've got to further wait for them to wait on this climate action plan that we're putting out, which is not going to go into a great deal of detail around the CCOs. It's not. It doesn't. It'll cover them off somewhat, but they need to take a lead. And frankly, they're not. So I agree completely with Councillor Darby. And frankly, it's only when we put something that directs them that, in my view, they're going to make those changes. And this is urgent, Mr. Chair.
Through the chair, look, I don't disagree with the sentiment. I think that it's the best way of doing this. I think perhaps it's been slightly unfair on the CCOs to say they're doing nothing in this regard. In fact, one of the general comments is that each of the statements of intent does highlight quite a lot about what they're doing in the climate change space. I guess we also have stated in our report that we'd be looking for a more strategic response in the future, and I think that comes from Council setting that overall strategic direction and then the CCOs responding to that. Yes, I agree with you, Councillor Walker, the CCOs, from what I understand, have been engaged in the development of the action plan. What I don't know is the financial implications for giving effect to the action plan, whether the CCOs understand that. I think we're all on the same page. It's the best way to actually give effect to the direction that you set as councillors through that action plan. So, look, we can include a signal in the shareholder feedback that goes back to say that the action plan will be finalised shortly, and that we're expecting each CCO to respond to that. How meaningfully they can respond in the final statement of intent before the action plan is actually adopted, that's the bit that I'm just unsure of. And my advice to you is that you have the backup of the Auckland Council legislation to then be more prescriptive at the time when you adopt the action plan to say, and this is what we expect you to give effect to.
So hence that's your reference to over time, Council will expect to see a more strategic response, you're saying. Right, Mayor Goff.
Yeah, just picking up Councillor Darby's point, I think in the letter of intent we have already put that in. We say that the climate change is a priority for the council group. We made those ambitions clear in the Auckland Plan, and the Auckland Climate Action Plan currently being developed will provide further governance. We expect Panuku's statement of intent will outline how it will respond to these plans and address climate change through the application of new ideas and approaches. So we've got it in the letter of intent there. We say this is coming, it is a priority for us, and we expect you to respond to it. So maybe that covers off the point.
I think all we're dealing with here is actually a timing issue of when the action plan is going to be adopted vis-a-vis when the statements of intent have to be finalised. I think
this gives us the heads up that Councillor Darby was keen that they should get. They know it's coming, and they know it's a priority for us, and they know they need to respond to it.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks. I just want to check a specific query with respect of the community engagement and communication aspect of Panuku's statement of intent. I recall last time they were in, their CEO, Mr. McDonald, made a reference to essentially gauging public or community feel on any given proposal early on in the piece and making a call rather than kind of pushing on. And I think of a couple of pretty dramatic examples in my ward where, you know, right at the very outset it was very, very clear what the local community thought. In fact, it was unanimous, but they still ploughed on and tried to basically overlook the clear directive they were getting given. Now, I've looked through the little sections there to do with their various work plan on strategic direction in terms of community engagement and communication. I don't really pick up anything along that nature in terms of the comments that are made here. Is someone able to point me to phrases or a section there that actually picks up that recognition that was publicly made by their CEO?
So through the chair, on page 15, when they talk about the celebrating neighbourhoods through innovative neighbour, they say a new approach to community-focused communications. They'll trial new and innovative engagement and communication channels such as social pinpoint, local information kiosks, and that, I mean, I think that's the key point where they were referencing that.
Yeah, I take those references to be innovative ways of, supposedly getting to people, not actually responding to what the people tell them. That's my concern, is that they have had a track record in a number of instances where they did not do that, and it's led to not only considerable angst within the community, but also additional expense to council. So I don't see any sense in any of their community engagement comments a recognition that that they're going to take on board and respond earlier rather than later to clear directives from the community.
Through the chair, we could include a statement in the feedback if that was the view of the committee, that we would like some greater clarity around that.
There was something that the Panuku leadership.
Are people generally supportive of that? I think we've got a little bit of similar stuff from Auckland Transport, so. Yeah, I'm just getting I think I've got a majority of nods there. Yep. Put your microphone on, please, Councillor.
I just make the comment that a number of the concerns that we have about a particular CCO, I would suggest apply across a number of CCOs, Panuku, RFA, Auckland Transport and the like, have all been doing things, sometimes at odds with the community and stakeholders. And in some cases, for example, destroying sports and doing other things that are, frankly, things that ward councillors, communities, and often ourselves are unaware of until people in the community or stakeholders bring those things to our attention and ask for oversight on our part. So it all goes back to transparency with stakeholders and the community being open, advising people in advance, and that also includes ward councillors who are often completely out of the loop across these council-controlled organisations. And yes, there is mention of local boards, but there's no mention of ward councillors. And we know that the council sitting as council and the committees are often too busy to deal with matters that are of great concern to local communities and their ward councillors, but obviously don't hit the council agendas, and often people aren't able to engage with council committees because they're prevented.
So Claire, you're taking it on board regards Panuku. It seems to be the consensus around. Now, I have no one else, so we're going to move on from Panuku and we're going to go to RFA. Ed.
Good afternoon, councillors. RFA, I don't have a huge amount of comments to make about the RFA statement of intent. The three strategic priorities that were set out in the letter of expectation were around working closely with council on the redevelopment of assets, and that was really around a behavioural thing as much as anything else, about really closely coming and talking to council about its plans, which partly reflects the conversation we've just been having. The second one was around working closely with council on the arts and culture review that will be brought to you in May for the second part of the terms of reference. And the third priority was delivering on RFA's capital redevelopment program. As I say, I haven't got significant comment about the RFA statement of intent. I think it largely reflects those expectations that were set out. We have made a minor comment about really reflecting that commitment to engagement with council. But I think for RFA, in many ways, it's about over the next year seeing that in the statement of intent their financial planning is really accurate, ensuring that quality advice really supports the strategic decisions they're making and is seen to, and really around their performance and really basic parts of being part of the council group, such as doing their board performance review and doing their audit and risk reporting and things like that. But that's performance material as much as statement of intent things. So that's all I've got to say about RFA.
All right, thank you, Ed. Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
Yeah, so I've been taking a keen interest in RFA I've been taking a particularly keen interest in their financial planning. And as a councillor, I don't have adequate oversight of their financial planning, and I don't believe our finance department has adequate oversight over their financial planning, certainly in terms of any breakdown into capital, operational and revenue centres. And you need that if you're going to have any understanding. I don't have adequate understanding of the allocation of their overhead budget. So I am saying, as a councillor, I am taking a particular interest in this council-controlled organisation. I'm also going through the others, and I'm finding extreme difficulty in what their return on investment is across a number of parts of their portfolio, what their financial performance is across part of their portfolio. And when I talk to officers in finance and I ask them those questions, they can't answer those questions either. So as the guardian of the ratepayer's purse, I am saying I am having a lot of difficulty. So I just want to put that on the table, and I consider that that needs to be applied across all of the council-controlled organisations. I do not think that the apparent policy that we have of letting them get on with it and making the assumption that they know best is actually working. Because when I look at things that I'm familiar with on a case-by-case basis, what I turn up is things that are not working, that are often not financially sustainable, that are often not environmentally sustainable, and are costing us a considerable amount of money. And I refer in particular to the lack of business cases across much of RFA's portfolio. I cannot obtain those business cases. And I've been raising these issues with Alistair on an ongoing basis, so this is no surprise to council officers. So I don't know how we can effect those changes, but I am saying as one councillor that is interested in more scrutiny, I can't get it. And I know when members of the public try and get it, it's even worse for them.
So my understanding is, Councillor Walker, they have offered to sit down with you at RFA and go through as much as they can that is not commercially sensitive, and I've heard that offer being made to you a number of times.
And I have taken up that offer,
yep.
And the information that's forthcoming is still inadequate. So I'm pursuing the coding that RFA uses for their financial transactions. I'm still waiting for one of the officers to come back to me on that. And I'm certainly up for further analysis, but at this stage, I don't have it.
Okay. So do you think that's performance and operationally based more than, shareholder comments on the statements of intent?
I think it's a vital part of the statement of intent. And in an earlier statement of intent, the Mayor specifically mentioned more transparency. But again, that has not been followed up, and that is not apparent presently.
Ed, Alistair.
Look,
we know you're prepared because this comes up every time.
Yeah, I won. So through the chair, I think the issues of what financial information is available, the finances in the statement of intent really do just reflect decisions made in the annual plan. And more detail around the finances and where it's going to is an annual plan discussion, I'd suggest. From a perspective of business cases for projects, I understand that a business case policy is going to be developed by the finance team, which will make clear across the group, council parent and CCOs, what the expectation is in the development of CCO business cases. So I think that would be the best place to resolve that issue.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, I'm familiar with all of those comments from Alistair because he's made those comments to me before, and Alistair is certainly familiar with my concerns. At this point, my concerns in terms of solutions have not been registered, and we're going into an annual plan with significant financial implications, and I can't get the information that I need. So that's where I'm at.
Councillor Newman, then Councillor Casey, then Councillor Simpson.
with respect to Regional Facilities Auckland, it's impossible to make any informed sort of comment about the appropriateness of some of the assumptions that drive this statement of intent. So I'd like you to clarify for me, noting that the EBITDA performance around the stadia has been poor, terrible, that the stadia performance I don't think has been particularly great, that I have real concerns around some of the heads of agreement information that RFA have provided, that I don't think that the art gallery performance has been great, that I don't think that they've hit their financial targets, and I've asked them on a number of occasions if they need to revise them. And given that this organisation receives millions of dollars of ratepayers' money, why should I just be comfortable with signing off the statement of intent today?
Well, the first response is you're not signing off the statement of intent today, and we can provide that sort of feedback. Most of those issues are performance issues that need to be raised with RFA when they come in for their quarterly reporting.
The quarterly reporting is reporting against the KPIs. So it's about setting the KPIs to start, which of course is a statement of intent process. And at what point, what other mechanism is available to us to be able to get this right? We've got the statement of intent in the letters, but we've got this organisation that seems to become quite problematic. And I would like to think that from a governance perspective, that we can land on a set of principles and KPIs that are fit for purpose. I'm not getting it here.
So perhaps the question for the through the chair is what additional KPIs or what area of the KPIs in your view need improvement, and we can have that discussion with RFA.
I echo what Councillor Walker's been saying, because I think it is quite reasonable for us to be able to have a greater level of transparency across their cost centres. And actually we are talking, commercial sensitivity is quoted back to us, but we are talking about ratepayers' money here.
Okay, Councillor Casey.
Just like to say thank you for commenting on that RFA provide additional visibility for public good, because that was one of the comments I made to you. And I think what I'd like to see is that the recognition that RFA offers venues for all Aucklanders, and accessibility is really something they do really well. And I want to see that acknowledged. I want more talk about signed events or audio described events and signed events. But also, I like the word free events. And RFA does provide free events. It does provide venues to community groups free of charge. That's not something I want to see lost. I want to see that highlighted. That's part of the public good component of what they do. And I want it to be much, much more visible. So that was all. So thank you for picking that up. I look forward to the next report that highlights all of that.
Councillor Thompson.
I'm one of these people that tries to find a solution, and I have a bit of empathy for Councillor Walker and Councillor Newman on this. So my questions are, the business case policy, when will that be to a place that we can vote on that?
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's scheduled to come up to committee in June.
Okay, June. And when do we sign off the final SOIs?
August.
Fantastic, because I think potentially this will solve this problem. We're in the sort of a second stage of a 3 or 4 stage process on getting to the end of these SOIs. So I think that if the business case policy does what it is intended to do, I think it will probably give some confidence to the financial reporting back and the drivers and the reasoning and the stuff around that. We will obviously workshop this policy, so that'll be another opportunity for us to input into that. But I think that both councillors have a reasonable reasonable concerns, that we will hopefully, by way of this other process, assist in giving them some confidence.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thanks. Just following on from that, what does that mean in the interim? And I'm looking at point number 42 in the report here about working closely with council and strategic priorities being supported by clear business cases will underpin RFA's operational decision making. I get all that, and I get what's coming up, but in the meantime, we're going to be having some big priorities coming before us, not least of which is conceivably $91 million for, for a stadium and other things related to the stadiums too. To this point, we've been told, well, there's a business case, it costs $91 million, there's your business case, jog on. So in this interim, what does that mean? Because the biggest ticket items are coming up and will be getting put to us before this policy is in place. So that's not a very satisfactory position from where I'm sitting.
Yeah. So I don't think the $91 million stadium's coming into the annual plan, Councillor Watson. I don't think that's part of it.
No, but there is a venue development strategy coming that's still part of it, but it hasn't changed quite a change. Things change pretty recently.
That may or may no, the final decision on that, my understanding, hasn't been made, so the venue development strategy may not be coming forward.
Okay. So Mr. Chair, the position I'm looking to avoid is the one that affected the last council, where there was a vote for approval in principle, and that's taken then as the approval to then proceed. And I see that happening again in a couple of weeks' time, where the same sort of process is in operation, and there's no business cases at all.
The indication I've had from the mayoral office is I think it's going to be business as usual, and there's really going to be no great change. But I'll get the mayor to confirm whether there's anything new.
I think we should entirely get out of our minds that we're about to approve a business case for $91 million for a stadium or any sum of money in the coming annual budget. It is not there. I don't expect it to be there. I don't expect it to be put up. And if it were perchance put up, we don't have $91 million to invest in it, and it won't happen. However, had we had money to invest in it, there would need to be a full business case that would persuade the majority of members of this governing body in order to approve it. But as you'll discover in a workshop we'll be holding tomorrow, stadia will be very much down the list of our obligations to have to meet over the coming couple of years. So I've heard lots of debate about the 92 million. I've told RFA quite bluntly, there isn't the money, they won't be getting it.
So thanks for that. And just one final comment I'm taking from that then that any votes or endorsements or whatever you want to call them in the interim without business cases, they can't be worth the paper they're written on then, really, can they? If that's the financial background under which we're operating, and if we're to take what the mayor's said as being part of an approval or a disapproval or anything else that goes along with it, it can't be.
Well, this governing body wouldn't approve any major expenditure item without seeing a proper business case. That's the process that we follow, and nothing gets approved unless members around this table vote for it.
Councillor Newman.
Chair, I note in item 11 the information on the work programme coming up, and it will be set out on page 294 of this agenda, which I think is a bit germane to this conversation that we're having. So as I understand it, in next month's meeting, we're going to be having a debate about Colindale, and we're going to endorse the heads of agreement and approve the development costs. It says, note venue development strategy is being considered at the planning committee. When will that be considered at the planning committee? Because the assumptions behind the venue development strategy include a significant quantum of cost. So what is the timing for that? a strategy that the chief executive sent out to me the other day and committed to me as a live document. So, could you clarify?
Well, I'm not going to clarify anything for the Councillor Darby. He'll clarify that. I think the Collindale one, yes, it may be May, but it's more likely to be June. So, Councillor Darby.
We're still waiting
May,
feedback from the chief executive's letter to key stakeholders, and a subsequent letter was sent out, and so that's delayed it a little bit. I'd have to just check with the chief executive.
I raise the question, Chair, because the venue development strategy can't be considered in isolation of the costs of it. So if that is going to be a matter that's subject to formal comment from key stakeholders, and that's going to input into the assumptions that drive it. I think we're now up to draft 4 of that document through the years. Can I have some comfort that that is not going to be considered until we've actually got in place this big new business case program of works? Because I can't see how we could sign that off prior to the testing of these business case work programs, because the funding consequences of the venue development strategy are huge and currently not funded, unless I'm going to be learning something new tomorrow, which I assume I'm not, based on what the Mayor has just told me.
Okay, I think I made the statement earlier, 10 minutes ago, that the venue development strategy may not end up coming to this council. It may be held over to the following council, who knows. And as Councillor Darby's just confirmed, I think there were 27 codes written to Councillor Darby.
Of course, not just sporting codes, because most of the success of Stadia is actually with entertainment these days.
So, sorry, letters, I'm meaning letters went out, and I think there's only been 4 or 5 replies to date, is my understanding. That's the way it's slipping. Yep, that's the way it's slipping. Okay, but it's a moving feast, and I'm just giving you the update on what I've heard, and you've heard Councillor Darby say what he said. Now we have no one else on RFA, so I'm taking that we move on, and we are going to break for lunch. So thank you, and then we will stick with the smaller ones. The next one, water care, which is all good, and then we'll go to Auckland Transport last. Thank you.
Through the chair, what time should we be back from lunch?